Three, two, one, go. Hi, everyone. I have got a very interesting episode today. For all those people who are tuning into the podcast for the very first time, I'm Dr. Manan Thakrar. I'm a consultant psychiatrist. I work in London. And the guest I have today is very different from the guests we've had so far. I've got someone who's worked in the marketing industry for decades and is coming out with a fascinating book. Barry, I thank you so much for sparing the time to be on the podcast today. I'll let you introduce yourself and tell us a little about you and what your background is, and then I'll have follow-up questions.
Well, it's an honor to be on your podcast. I think what you do is fantastic. My name is Barry LaBov, and I am the owner of a marketing company in the United States called LaBov Marketing, Advertising, and Training. And I'm also the author of a book that's going to be out shortly on Simon & Schuster distribution called The Power of Differentiation. And what's interesting is the subtitle is Win Hearts, Minds, and Market Share. And that's what it's all about. It's about people. Everything you're about is all about people. It's humanity. It's engaging people. It's understanding. And that's what this book is about. It's about understanding the magic of a brand and then celebrating it first with the most important people in the world, your employees and those who represent you.
I think that's a very interesting introduction to what we want to talk about today. We've had a chance to sort of briefly touch upon the topics that we'd like to discuss, but tell us a bit about how psychology and marketing get together. How do you use, I know that you told me that you were a student of psychology and you're avidly interested in psychology. In your experience in working in the marketing industry, how big of a role does psychology or mindset play to all of the work that you do?
I think it's critical. I was a psych major, and that's what I was going to be. I was going to be a psychologist. And then I had a calling to go into a creative field in music and marketing. I believe that marketing is very much involved with psychology. It's the mindset of the people. And you and I will talk a little bit about this today, but it's not based on demographics only. It's about the mindset or the psychographics of people. It's what makes them think. It's what makes them excited. And I believe in business, whether we're trying to attract people to buy a product or whether we're trying to have our clients engage deeper with us, or whether we want our employees to truly understand why we do what we do, it's all about psychology. It's getting into their minds sincerely, not fooling them, but being able to touch the humanity in that person and say, look, what you're doing is important, and here's why we're doing it.
For all of us who don't know much about psychographics, please tell us what psychographics is and how some basic fundamentals of it to get us started.
Well, unlike you, I am certainly not a doctor or a scientist, so I will explain it in a more basic way. But if you think about it, I'll use a couple examples. One of my clients is Harley Davidson. And if you wanted to identify a Harley Davidson customer, would you think about how much does he or she make for a living? Or would you start to wonder, okay, well, what does that person like to do? Is that person someone who wants to be part of a community? Is it a person who loves to adventure? Is it a person who loves to kind of be viewed as a rebel? Well, those attributes are the mindset or the psychographic of that individual, because the difference, as an example for your audience, between a Harley Davidson rider and a BMW motorcycle rider are very different. The BMW motorcycle rider is someone who is more engineering based, is somebody that is more into precision, and is very likely to be a solo rider, to ride alone. A Harley Davidson rider has a completely different mindset than that, as I described. They're looking for community. They look for freedom. They want to go out there and try things that nobody else has tried, and they want to be on a motorcycle with another friend of theirs in a pack of 15 other motorcyclists. That's a completely different mindset. Now, the two different people I described could make the same amount of money and live in the same city and work in the same job. Their demographics would be the same. Their psychographics would be very different.
So, to sort of further simplify or go into a bit more depth with this example, say there are two people working as team leads in a corporate office. One of them is a BMW owner and the other one's a Harley Davidson owner. One of them wants to wear leather jackets, the other one wants to keep his suit on and wants to not get any dirt or any mud on his clothes, whereas the other one craves for it. Give us a couple of more examples to further understand how psychographics is different from, like you said, just the socio-demographics, which is what the age is or what the income of that person is. And please do tell us a couple of other examples as to how companies use these psychographics in marketing or targeting their target population in a good, ethical way, of course.
Of course. I'll give an example. This is a story that was a very interesting one for me, of a church insurance company. So what they do is they will insure churches, houses of worship throughout the United States and world, approached us and wanted to increase their market share. They wanted to increase their sales. And their leader came up to me and he said, I know what we need to do. What we need to do is stop acting as if we are connected to the church. And what we need to do is be more like our secular competitors. So that will allow us to increase market share. That will allow us to lower our prices. It will be great. And he said, will you help me do that? And I said, well, what we need to first do before you go down that path is we need to understand your customer. And he said, okay, you cannot understand my customer. Nobody understands it. We have never figured it out. So of course, that's exciting. I said, okay, well, tell me, what's so tough about these people? He said, okay, well, he said, here's our customer base. He said, they have absolutely nothing in common. He said, number one, it would be the very, very impoverished church with a person who works there who is at poverty level, and that is the church that generally it's a female that she works at, and she would be considered the administrative person at the church. She makes the decision at that church. He said, but there would be another type of customer where this would be a moderate-sized church, and they would hire a professional operations manager who would be in charge of that. I go, okay. He said, then there are churches where the person who is in charge of buying the church insurance is a volunteer. Normally a very well-off, rich person whose spouse might be a doctor, might be a very, very rich business person, and she or he is doing that as part of their love of the church. And he said, and then to add to all of those other types, he said, then you have the mega church, the very large church. And that large church has a COO, a chief operations officer who is in charge. He said, now one of them have anything in common. One of them is impoverished. One of them is a volunteer. One of them is a very high paid professional. It makes no sense. And we said, well, but it actually does make sense, because they all have one thing in common, and that is their psychographic, which is they are the protector of their church. No matter if they're rich, they're poor, female, male, professional, volunteer, they are the protector of the church. And what is most important to that person in their heart is to make sure they are looking out for the best interest of their house of worship. So when you think about that, that psychographic all of a sudden changes the way that you will communicate and market, in my case, to those individuals. Those individuals may not care so much about, hey, we have the cheapest insurance. They may care that, hey, we do believe, we do care about what you are doing and the difference you make, and we are there to help you. So to give you an idea how that manifested itself throughout the company, that church was about to change the way they were doing business. And luckily, they learned from that case. And they then embraced the fact that, you know what? They are the people who really believe just like their customer base. Their slogan then became, "We understand why," which is a great slogan for that kind of situation, because if they were in there to sell insurance and the person who was making the decision, well, what's the purpose for us to go do this with you? They would merely say, well, we understand why. So that's an example of the importance of psychographics. It's, again, like I said earlier, it's not how much money the person makes or how tall they are or if they're male, female. It's what's in their heart and their mind. It's what they.
That's really interesting. I'll share my screen and try to sort of help people visualize while you talk as well. I think that will be interesting. And so we're discussing about how psychographics is different from social demographic, and how social demographic is more focused on, say, your income by and large, or your age group by and large. Is this also, would that be right to say that that's how marketing was done back in the day when we had massive banners and multi-million or multi-billion dollar budgets where people would just give print media ads or massive banners? And is that different to how marketing is done these days?
It is. You're very accurate. Today, we are able to target, and we are able to say, you know, we can go after a certain group of people and present a message that they will say makes sense. Now, one of the ethics involved in this, just as in medicine, one of the ethics is we must be sincere. So we can't look at different psychographics and manipulate what we say our brand is about, because it won't work in the long run. We will lose. If Harley Davidson says, hey, forget about all this other stuff, we're the lowest price motorcycle in the world, and buy from us because we're cheap, that's not going to work for them. And if BMW motorcycle says, hey, you know what? You want to make a lot of noise on your motorcycle and hang out in large groups? Come on, let's do it. Well, that's not really BMW either. So it has to be sincere. It's got to be what we would call.
And how does a company find what they truly stand for? Like you said, for a church medical insurance company, their target demographic is pretty well set by itself, by the constitution of it. But say if we all now relate Harley Davidson with people who want to go on adventure, long bike trips, but how does a company or a person, say someone who's an entrepreneur and wants to develop a shop of their own, a practice of their own? A lot of our listeners are healthcare professionals from not only mental health, but also doctors from various different professions. How does someone identify what my ethos is, or what me as a person, or what does my company stand for? How do you identify that?
Well, that's great. When we're talking about psychographics, what we do is we will learn through surveys and interviews what are the preferences of those who love that product or that brand. What are the preferences? So if you look at, and again, I think one thing we can do today that's kind of fun, we can talk about different brands that are good, but they have a certain type of customer who loves them. So if you look at Apple, which is a very favorite brand for many of us, Apple will tend, if you interview and you survey their customer base leans very much toward the creative person, the person who wants to create videos, create artwork, the person who wants to create music. It's an expression. It's creativity at its heart. Now, if you look at a PC owner can make the same amount of money, be the same height from the same city, etc., but might be more interested in Excel sheets or in accounting or in financial information. Those are psychographics. So one way you can determine the psychographics is by learning about your customer base. And here's where it gets a little fascinating, because you're not trying to learn just about how they use your product. You're also learning about other things that seem to be disconnected. So for instance, an Apple owner is more likely to paint or draw, let's say. Well, that has nothing to do necessarily with the computer they bought, but maybe it does. They're more likely to be in a band and play music. And you go, that's interesting. Well, they may not be using the computer for that, but that is what they're like. For example, a Volkswagen owner. My company's done a lot of work with Volkswagen. The Volkswagen psychographic, and this is interesting, is the person who kind of likes being different. So for instance, they'll drive up in a Volkswagen and somebody will say, hey, why are you driving that thing? Now that person loves to stand out. So when we were doing research, we found that they like to stand out. They like to be known as a quirky, strange person. They like to be kind of an outcast, somebody going, well, gee, why do you have that thing? You could buy one of these others. They like to be nomads. They want to stand out. Whereas, as we did some research with Lexus owners as an example, they like to fit in. They want the security of being part of something that has a great reputation and is a very safe and intelligent choice. That's very important to them. So you start to look at what are these things that don't necessarily connect to my product, but they're personality attributes. That helps you understand what's important to them and how to speak their language. The language of talking to a Harley Davidson owner can be considered vulgar compared to speaking to the owner of a Kawasaki. But it's okay with that Harley Davidson owner. They use that language all the time. That's part of the way they live their life. So it's that personality. And again, it's all about...
Yeah, absolutely. I think a couple of very interesting examples that you mentioned, say when we talk about someone who's an Apple user or someone who's a Microsoft user or a PC user, and how one of them would be like a number cruncher, whereas the other one would want to be more artistic, even if it's just like taking and editing pictures, videos, audio, being in a band, things like that. What led to companies starting to focus more on psychographics rather than the social demographic side of things? Like a lot of us have watched, not sure if you've watched Mad Men or shows
Of
like
course,
that, which...
yeah.
Yeah, so the marketing in general was like a very evolved science even decades back. But is psychographics something? Is that something which is developing and happening more over time, or is it just that people are learning more and it was always a very big part of marketing back in the day as well? Talk to us a little bit about how you've seen the marketing industry evolve around the psychographic side of things.
Well, it's like sports medicine. Why are orthopedic surgeons so advanced today? Why is sports medicine for common people like you and me so advanced? Well, it's the money involved, because sports medicine has evolved because of the sports industry and the millions of dollars the athletes are making. And it got down to the point where they're going, my gosh, we've got to find a way to get this athlete back out on the field quickly. Well, that all has cascaded to the common person like me. I'm not an athlete. Well, same thing when we look at advertising. It's money. And what's happened is we've become a global economy. And what used to be, hey, we're going to try to dominate New York City and LA and Chicago, 3 major cities. Now we have to look at, wait a minute, how do we market worldwide? How do we reach hundreds of millions of people? Because it's no longer a small world. So you cannot afford to do generic one-size-fits-all marketing because it's not possible to afford it. So that's what's happened. And we've become more scientific also because we're gathering that information. So Facebook and others all have information on us, and they know what we like, and they know what types of products we tend to lean toward. Are we value-based people? Are we people that want to buy the most expensive of the most expensive? And again, you know, we've talked a little bit about this, but many of the folks in your audience run their own practice. It comes down to what kind of customer, or in your case, patient, finds your practice attractive. What is it? And it cannot just be the meds that you offer, because you'll offer the same meds that anyone else does. So there's something you're doing. There's something unique. And it applies whether you're a $2 billion company or whether you're a 2-person practice. It applies whether you're a new practice or whether you've been around for 200 years. So my companies work with a couple of wonderful brands that have been around for over 2 centuries. And, you know, you start to think about, they must be doing something right. You know, they've got to have done something right over these 200 years. And in their case, they need to make sure they protect that uniqueness or differentiation. I will also say, on the opposite end, that brand new company or that brand new practice, it's the same thing. Why is somebody coming to me? Why do they seem to find what I am doing very, very positive in their lives? What is that? And are there ways that I can make sure that I continue that? Because one of our challenges as entrepreneurs is we're willing to change almost anything because we're aggressive, right? We're ambitious. But we have to realize there are certain reasons our patients or our clients come to us, and there are certain things we do.
Would you like to tell us a bit more about one or two of these companies that you've worked with to help them find what is really unique about them? And I think that will help us understand that a bit better as well.
I'd love to. I'm right now working with a wonderful healthcare system, multi-billion dollars system, 20,000 employees, and they're in a situation where they're expanding. And while that sounds just great, sounds like everything's going great, one of their concerns is, okay, we need to make sure that we have a strong culture. And as we all think about this, as practices are being acquired and hospitals are being acquired by the system, it's very easy to lose the culture that brought you there, number one. And it's also very easy, and this is a big challenge, to disenfranchise those who you are bringing on. So that new hospital that you bring on, are you embracing the very people that you're inviting to join? Or are you saying, look, keep your head down, keep your mouth shut, and do what we say because we are now your parent company? So this very wise system approached us and said, can you help us? And what we are doing is we are going to 30 different locations of theirs, and we are meeting with employees in small roundtables. And it's not to focus on employee satisfaction, although it will ultimately help. There's no doubt. But what we are focusing on is, what do these employees view as a great day? What is a best day? So I'll go a little deeper into that because we're looking for their best day. Describe it. So when we sit with these folks and we introduce each other and we get a little comfortable, we go, describe your best day. And each of them do. and we start to listen in between the words sometimes to the emotions as to what makes a really wonderful day for these folks. And what's interesting is in this healthcare system, it's very important for them to feel accomplishment. The people we talk to want to accomplish, they want to achieve, they want to solve a problem, they want to embrace a patient and help that patient get through that day. They also have learned that they're challenged because of the size of this organization to collaborate to the level they would love to collaborate. So it's very valuable for this unique group of people to connect with each other. They are not solo performers. So from a psychographic mindset, this is a group of individuals that look at themselves as a team. And a very interesting concept in here also is that while the parent company says, you know, we're a big family, the employees have a different word to use, and I just mentioned it, team. And if you think about it, there is a difference. They want those around them to be accountable. They want those around them to perform at their best because they want to accomplish. So one thing we are helping that system to understand from a psychographic standpoint, a mindset, yes, they have a nice family type environment, but this is first and foremost a team environment, an environment where I turn to you and I need you to come through and you can count on me, as opposed to a family environment where, you know, you've worked here for 10 years and I've worked here and I'm not going to tell you anything. And, you know, we both work here. No, these are coworkers, whether they're medical or whether they're administrative. They are coworkers who need each other. So they are very codependent. They are very team oriented. So as an example, I share that because words create worlds. And in the English language, there are 200,000 words. So we need to really determine which words describe us our very best. So in that case, that company would not be best described as a family. It's a team.
Mm.
You see what I'm saying? It's inspiring. And as an example, that leadership of that great health system, if they got up and they said, we're one big happy family, it's a disconnect. We are a team and we are counting on each other and we are achieving. You know, families do not win the Super Bowl, as an example. They don't win the Super Bowl. Teams win. Teams win championships. Families do not win championships. This group, psychographically, is competitive and they want to achieve. I hope that...
What was really interesting about the example that you gave was, my understanding of psychographics always was that it's more about how you market your product or your entity to the client or the customer. But it's fascinating how psychographics plays a really important role even internally within the employees to be able to identify the values or the ethos or the objectives by which you want to define the company in itself. And let's use a very widely accepted example like, say, Apple or Google. Please explain to us as to how is psychographics used not only internally, and especially when companies go through a massive change as well, like Steve Jobs, the iPhones or the products that Apple made when it was just Steve Jobs, it has massively shifted from when a creative, eccentric genius was at the helm of things as compared to someone who knows his budget really well, someone who knows the... It said that Tim Cook is much more of a supply chain guy, and he knows how supply chains work. He knows how products work and how the factories work, and hence instead of getting that one iPhone, you get 4 different iPhones which are targeted towards 4 different types of people. And every time you think of buying the iPhone 15, you still feel like, oh, I might just pay like $100 more and get the Plus, and then you'd want to pay just $100 more and get the Pro, and you end up having a situation where the cheapest iPhone, even though it's one of the costliest mobile devices in the world, is still not the highest selling one. It's actually the Pro one which is the highest selling one. So talk to us through this example as to how do psychographics change a company or drive a company internally and externally as well, and how as someone who runs a company, how do I take into account both these things?
I'll tell you, that's a wonderful question. And here's an interesting thought. Apple Computer Company was the original name of Apple. And if you notice, we've spoken of Apple today and we say Apple. Well, it was Apple Computers, not Apple iPod, not Apple iPad, Apple Computers. And that's because of the vision of Steve Jobs, because he did not survey his customers and say, what kind of computer do you want? He didn't do that. He knew that he had an internal psychographic or culture of constant exploration. So very shortly, he realized, putting computer at the end of my name is going to limit me, because I don't know what the limits of what we do really are. I have no idea what our limits are. So from the very beginning, after he built some of that momentum, you can start to see the fact that there is a high level of originality that he infused in there, a high level of creativity and innovation where there is a hunger to constantly grow. One of the other things that was instituted in that company was they had lots of thinking, lots of ideas going on, and they had to literally reduce the number of concepts they were going to focus on because they could not invest enough money and resources to follow every vision and every concept that was in the mind of Jobs and his people. So that's a very important thing to understand. From a research standpoint, Jobs was very famous for, in his own profane way, saying, I don't want to ask I don't want to ask my customers what they want in their computer or their phones. And they said to him, well, why? He said, because they don't know what is possible. They can only speak about what they know. He said, we know what is possible far more than they do. So where he learned more about his customer was in the psychographic area, which is his customers yearned and were inspired by innovation. They loved it. They wanted to create. They wanted to, basically put a man on the moon, so to speak. They wanted to try things that hadn't been done before. And that's what Apple stood for and still does in the eyes of most people. So Apple understands that right now, if they came out with a brand new product that had nothing to do with computers or watches, we're going to pay attention to it. And that's because their brand stands for something that is aspirational, which is part of their mindset that they appeal to, but it's aspirational. I want to do something that hasn't been done before. I want to create something that hasn't been done. That's why, Doctor, you're right on target. That's why their products will not usually sell great at the low end. They will sell phenomenally at the mid to high range, because you're not getting into Apple to do the minimum. You want to explore what can be done. So that's what they've done that has been brilliant. You turn to them for that kind of thinking. It's a brother or sisterhood when you own a Mac. And there's a smile you have. When you own a Mac, people will smile about it. And you have to say, why would you smile about an appliance? Well, we've talked psychographics a lot here, but because to you, it's not an appliance. It is a gateway for you to create. And all I want, because my psychographics is, I want to create. Give me more gateways for more creativity. So this is an interesting lesson for all of us in the audience, where we would fall short if we don't watch out in their case is to start saying, look, let's cut corners. Let's commoditize a little bit. Let's dumb down what we have, and we can make a lot of money. And in the short run, they would. And
on that note, would you say that, okay, I'll rephrase it in a different way. There wouldn't be any company in the world which would not want to be associated with in the same breath as the idea of innovation or aspiration. I think every company would aspire to do that. But how does the marketing genius of Steve Jobs or Apple in general work in such a way that aspiration in mobile phones means Apple? How does a company achieve that level of synonymity with the idea of innovation or aspiration? And I'm asking this also because it's a learning lesson for anyone who wants to own a business or anyone who wants to own something of their own, is how do you market your product or yourself to the point where you become synonymous with the idea of innovation or aspiration in general, even though factually one could argue that Android phones or Samsung, which now has foldable devices and you could bend them, you could fold them, you could have like 120 megapixel cameras and you could still do 10 megapixel cameras, and there's just so much customization, so much actual objectively more innovation happening there, design wise or operating system wise, camera wise. However, it's not Samsung that we think of when someone thinks about or says the word innovation or aspiration. We think of Apple. So is that a marketing genius? And if so, how does a company try to work towards achieving that?
It is a marketing genius, and it is what Jobs did. I mean, we all know that Jobs had rough edges, and he did some, less than positive things as a person. But his approach was relentless in that he was going to get what he wanted and produce product and ship it out the door so that people got it. And one thing I'll share too, you may be familiar with this, but he coined a term called ship it, which was basically an edict, an order to his engineering team to force his product out the door, even when it was not perfect. So one thing we deal with is imperfection and worrying about not being perfect at what we do. Jobs forced his engineering team to live up to deadlines and push, for instance, the iPhone out to the public, even before it was to the level his engineers wanted it to be at. And that's why today we have these constant fixes. We have, oh, hey, there's a new fix on your phone, press this. Okay, have a new, and we don't even think about it. But if you step back, those fixes have been primarily because there was an error or problem from a previous fix. So what he did is he constantly stayed out in front, and he did not stop and wait for everything to be perfect. That's another one of these unique attributes to what he did. And you would think it's wrong. It would have hurt him. It did not hurt him. He pushed it. He went out there and he did it. A different example, we talked a little bit about cars, but when you have a unique attribute in your brand, something that people attribute to you, you also quite often will be forgiven. And I'll give you an example. Many of the European car companies have tremendous innovation. I was very fortunate to work with Audi for over 2 decades. And Audi's cars are great. They had great technology. Oh my gosh. But you know what was interesting was they would go up against, they would compete against, let's say, could be Cadillac or Toyota or Lexus. And Toyota and Lexus, the same company, very, very wonderful company, but their approach and consequently their customer base is very different. Their customer base really wants dependable quality. They want to make sure that that car is going to run, it's going to work, it's not going to break down. They really like that. Now, you might say, well, everybody wants that. And that's what we need to think about. We make assumptions. Well, everybody wants it. Well, yeah, I'm not going to go buy a car that you tell me will break down. But when we get into what's most important, maybe what's most important to me is to have some pretty cool innovation. So for instance, Audi would have infinitely programmable windshield wipers, meaning not 3 speeds, but you could absolutely dial in exactly the speed you wanted for your windshield wiper. Now you may say, who cares about that? Well, it was kind of cool. It was neat. It's unique. Who else has it? Well, here's the other side of the coin. Once in a while, that would break down and those windshield wipers wouldn't work because it was a brand new technology. But the Audi owner who had the psychographic of, hey, I like the cool stuff. I want to get the really neat stuff. This is really cool. They were pretty patient about it because, hey, you know, it's the coolest thing. It's neat. It broke down a little bit here or there. I got it fixed. It's fine. The Lexus owner, psychographic, would not put up with that. That would be, okay, hold on a minute. I want to sell this thing. I don't want this car. I can't stand it. So I'll bring it back to those in your audience. You have practices. People are running their own practice, and they are literally competing with others. Yet you have this interesting group of patients who seem to be very happy. They seem to be drawn to you, and you have more just like them. It's interesting to then, through listening to them and learning what their other interests are, to find out what kind of mindset do they have? What do they value? Do they value being on time more than innovation? Do they like that you're offering some very unique insights? Or do they like you just to say, look, here it is, there you go, go. What are they looking for? Do they care what your waiting room looks like? Or is that really important? You know, are they neat freaks? They want everything perfect? Or it's like, who cares? On top of that, the more we understand these things, the better we can celebrate those uniquenesses with the people who work with our patients or our clients. The thing to also realize, and we've talked about brands that are not necessarily in the industry that you're serving, but what's interesting is we have to think about the people who represent us, the people at the various practices, the people at the healthcare locations, the people at a car dealership, whoever. They are the face of the brand. For those who are in your audience, think about this. You may be a brilliant medical professional. You may be a genius, but if the person who is behind the desk, who is the reception person or whatever, is, let's say, nasty or whatever, that is your brand. And I will never go back there because they don't care about us. Well, the doctor may care deeply, but if that person who represents the practice does not understand that, now, wait a minute, our patients value this. They value such and such. They value that we ask how they're doing. They value if we ask them if they would like to get a drink of water or whatever. We are there to serve them, and this is what they value. So again, that's why when I share the idea that once you understand what makes you different, and it should not be 100 things, it should be 2 or 3 things that you say, you know what, this is unique. This is a process we have. Nobody else seems to do this exactly. Once you understand it, Your team, the people who represent you, are the most important people in the world because they are your brand.
A couple of follow-up questions. First, I'll ask the first brand-related question and then the HR-related question. The brand-related question is, when does a brand also identify when and how to pivot or how to change that identity? Like you said, let's carry on with that Apple example. That I still remember that the first couple of iPhones were very unfinished products. There was the antenna gate and the iPhones would start warming up. And the way we look back at the iPhone 2 or 3 now as a legacy product, it was a very unfinished product which came out into the market. But the people were patient and they gave the time, energy, and although paid an exorbitant amount, pretty much like draw a lot of parallels with the Cybertruck right now, which has a lot of like rough edges, but still people are waiting and there's millions of orders. And now you relate the brand of Apple with extreme software stability. You identify the 14 going on to iPhone 15 as a minor incremental update with a lot of stability, and now even the slightest of rough edge or slightest of Apple would never, you wouldn't identify that with that. You used to identify Apple with this eccentric genius who would push the product, and now you identify Apple as the brand which does very minor incremental upgrades but gives you that stability which an Android wouldn't, and hence your phone always works. The fact that your phone hardly ever gets broken, the fact that your phone hardly ever has any software glitches. So it moved from a company which was innovation driven, or the identity of which was a creative genius, to a company which provides you with that stability, although at a premium cost. And hence you wouldn't get the newest features, but when you do get that feature would be a sure shot feature which would have been evolved and perfected and polished. How and when does a brand decide to change their identity and evolve or pivot from this identity A to an identity B, and how do you know that it's the right time to do so?
Your customers will be telling you that it's time to pivot. So you just mentioned Elon Musk. Musk lowered the price of his cars, which is, when was the last time prior to Elon Musk doing this that anybody came out and said, oh, by the way, we're going to go lower the prices of our products, and not by $5, by $5,000 to $10,000. He realized at a certain point that, okay, sales are going to get sluggish now. There's a huge influx of competition. The Tesla product, and by the way, I've currently own 2 Teslas, so I'm a Tesla customer. The Tesla product
is not
a superior. Yeah, and it's not superior. It's a great product. Okay. But he determined, okay, if I stay where I'm at, I'm going to lose. And he made a very bold move, which is brilliant. Now, as owners of a Tesla, it meant our current Teslas are worth less money now because he just lowered the price 10% or whatever it was. But he made a pivot because his customer base was changing. But he did not change. He didn't say, we're going to now build gasoline cars. We're not going to build that. What he did was he identified an area where he was vulnerable and he aggressively attacked it. And that's what he did. There are times you have to do that. Now, there are times where you make a mistake. So, for example, I worked with a German manufacturer that wanted to increase its market share and profitability. And they came up with a great idea, they thought, which was they were going to cut corners on a particular product of theirs that was a very, very popular car. And they were going to lower price so they could go up against Toyota and go up against Honda. And they thought this was going to be brilliant. So they lowered the price of their car $5,000, put it out there on the market. And you know what? At first, it was brilliant. Sales were really good and they made so much more money. It was crazy. Problem was, then all of a sudden it caught up with them because customers were unhappy and they were going, wait a minute, I just bought this car. This is my second model of this car. The first one was great. This one's like a tin can. It's nothing. It's no good. And they dramatically hurt their reputation because they decided they were going to change what they were really all about. So they did not just change their pricing, they changed the quality of their product. So again, you have to watch that because your customers are coming to you for what they think is a confident decision. And if you take away their confidence and they're going, wait a minute, I don't know what I'm buying anymore, you've lost them. So I think you got to watch that when you pivot. And you know what? Lots of pivots are mistakes and some pivots are brilliant. So
that was probably my follow-up question, that how do you decide that of the top 5 things that are most important to my customer, like the iPhone at one point in time used to be the slimmest phone in the world, or the first phone which brought 3G into the world, or the first phone that, say, bought FaceTime or like super retina displays as far as the resolution, like 326 pixels per inch side of things is concerned. So people used to relate iPhone with a premium phone experience and innovation both at the same time. Then how and when do you sit and decide that, no, look, we're not going for innovation, but we're still sticking to that core value of premium phone experience, and we will amplify the idea of a premium phone experience at the cost of innovation, but then we'll supplement innovation with stability. And just like you said with Elon Musk, he reduced the cost of the car, but then he supplemented it with a pickup truck, which again then gratifies those thrill-seeking, innovation-driven people. But how do you identify that, okay, this is the core value or the core belief that I am going to compromise with, and this is still not? Because back in the day when Steve Jobs used to say, unapologetically say, that this phone is not for everyone, this phone is only for the people who want to innovate and the people who identify with this core value, which has massively shifted. But then the valuation of the company has gone from 400-500 billion to $2 or $3 trillion now. So clearly it's worked. The fact that pivot has worked. But then how do you identify that in changing this pivot, these are the core values which I'll stick by, whereas these are the core values which I'll let go?
I think it's very difficult to say how you do it with any certainty, because I don't think there is certainty with what they're doing. Because if you look down the road, if it's, in 5 years, if you go, well, 5 years from now, the phone is certainly not innovative. Yes, it's stable, but all its competition is stable. What does Apple have? All it needs is one very, very aggressive competitor that comes out and becomes cool, so to speak, and they're in trouble. So they have veered, and there are many who feel that what Cook has done has veered them away from what they're, really was at the heart of their brand. So I think it's a dangerous thing they're doing. It's a calculated risk. And I think he would probably say, hey, look, if I...
And is a lot of it also about studying the market to be able to identify that, look, there's only so much innovation you can do with electric cars, or there's only so much innovation that you can do with phones. And then the early mover advantage that you had, where you could innovate generation on generation by 10-fold or 15-fold, is not going to happen now, especially after when you are a private company which is fighting with a lot of different private companies with 10 times the workforce. And hence let's now, whereas previously I was a high profit margin, low scale product, now I want to start being a slightly lower profit margin but high scale product, and I want to do the economies of scale. Is a little bit of that as well. Is that a factor in those decisions as well, would you say?
Well, it's a factor, and it does not guarantee success, but it is a factor. And it is what, it's prescribing meds to somebody, and you're pretty sure it'll work, but there's always a chance there will be a reaction. It's the same thing in this situation. You're prescribing the solution, and while it sounds very defensible, you can defend it, it is not a guarantee because you're veering away from what people know you for. And I guess you could say, and maybe they've done this because I do not work with Apple, maybe they have done enough consumer research to find that the consumer they want and they need to hold on to does not particularly value more innovation with their phone. It could well be that their consumers are already struggling with the innovation they already have, and it's the last thing they need to do as far as making it more complex yet more innovative. I don't have that information, but obviously it's a brilliant company. They've been an amazing success story, but they are making those decisions. But that's what leaders do. They make decisions, whereas the companies that don't have great leadership.
And while we're talking about how companies get psychographics right by identifying the core value of their customers, let's also discuss a couple of case vignettes that you would know about how companies get it wrong and end up completely destroying themselves. A couple of examples that come to one's mind is, say, Nokia or Kodak, or companies which used to have massive valuations back in the day, who had 10 times or 15 times the market capital or the investment capital, money in the pocket, to be able to invest in, say, the smartphone or invest in the product of the future, and they never saw it coming. So talk to us a little bit about what could be the consequences of, if you don't understand your client's psychographics right, what could go wrong and how could it manifest?
That's a brilliant question. I just spoke to somebody regarding Kodak who had some very good insights with them. As we all know, Kodak was synonymous with film and camera for years. And so here's an interesting insight. Kodak looked at itself differently than you do and I do. I looked at them as a film and camera company. And I would think most of our audience did as well. Do you know what they thought of themselves internally, how they looked at themselves? They were a chemical company. They were chemicals. Well, think about this. If you're going from chemicals, for your film processing to digital, that's bad news for a chemical company. Now, it's good news if you're first and foremost a camera or photo company. What they struggled with was looking at what they actually offered. So not to focus back on your audience too much, but what do you really offer your patients? If you think about, what am I offering patients? Am I offering chemicals or am I offering photos? What am I offering? And where Kodak made its mistake was, and it ended up filing bankruptcy and everything else, was they actually created the first digital phone, and their technology was in other companies' phones. So Kodak created it, but they didn't look at the future being digital as a positive. They looked at that, and you talk about pivoting, they did not pivot because they said, we are first and foremost a chemical company. And they didn't realize that not one of us looked at them as a chemical company. Chemicals were only a vehicle for us to get our photographs processed. It was a vehicle. It wasn't the end product. And we have to watch that. In my business, do I offer websites and do I offer, ad campaigns, or am I offering strategy? Am I offering the opportunity for people to identify their magic and their strengths? Okay, that's what I offer. If I don't watch out, I'm just going to compete in a website and, marketing and a logo company, that kind of thing. And so I think we have to look at that. That's where you could say it's a psychographic situation. I think it's a situation of not just psychographics, but it's a situation of misunderstanding the impact you make and why your customers come to you. And not so much the style of your customers. They're coming to you for one thing, and that was trusted film processing. And they threw it out, and, Fuji barreled forward as a chemical company.
The other question that I wanted to ask in that context also was you talked about a very important point about the HR side of things and how your employees or the people who work with you, for you, etc., should very much be in line with. And I keep going back to Apple. Weirdly enough, I was watching this video where 5 Apple employees back to back did interviews with the same guy on YouTube, and you couldn't help but identify and notice how well trained they were to be able to reflect what the company stands for. Like every line seems rehearsed, every joke seems boring but consistent, and it's like it's been hammered into them, the whole idea of what Apple stands for and what you're allowed to be and say and what you're not allowed to be and say. But every company has difficult employees. Every company has people who are not passionate about it. Every company has people who just can't wait for the clock to hit 5 and they would want to clock out at 4:45. They would want to go off sick. How do you manage the HR side of things, and how do you manage quality control when you start scaling your business into, say, if you're a practitioner and if you've got a hospital or a clinic, then the day you start hiring other doctors, the day you start having 5 clinic rooms in different corners of the city, which then essentially means that you've got 10 reception staff on a retainer, and at least 1 or 2 of them are going to be people, 1 or 2 of those doctors are going to be people who want to just go home as quickly as possible. They're not passionate about it, and they're just doing things for the heck of it, just to pay the bills essentially. How do you quality control in those situations?
It's very difficult to align a 3 or 4 person company. And of course, when you get into 30 to 20,000 to 28,000 people, you can't do it perfectly. One of the things that we believe in is we need to have a value system or a vision, however you want to word it, that people aspire to. It's very, very important. Here is an example that is non-medical and non-Apple. I work with a company in the rail car industry, and their CEO is a brilliant person, and he was helping to turn them around. And he talked to me and he said, you know what? We're having a really good quarter. Our stock price is up. The return on equity and investment for the investors is sky high. I'm going to go to one of our factories and I'm going to share that message. And he said, so what do you think of that? And I said, don't share that message. And he said, why? He said, it's positive. I said, it's positive to you. It's not positive to your people. He said, well, no, you're being cynical. People want to know we're doing well. I said, they want to know you're doing well. They don't want to think they're being taken advantage of. I said, but we have to think of something that's a greater calling than a stock price. And he said, well, like what? I said, well, see, this is what you need to look at. I told him, and I said, you're already doing it. You're just not realizing it. I said, haven't you improved the machinery so that it's safer than ever? And he goes, well, absolutely. He said, safety's incredibly important. I said, okay, we have to express that. Yes, the company's doing well. We've invested millions in these safety devices, et cetera, so that the calling for what we're doing goes well beyond 1 or 2 of us who are going to make the killing, right? Who cares about making all that money? Our employees don't. In fact, if anything, today it's a negative to think you're making profit. So what we have to do when you talk about from an HR standpoint, we have to share what is most important in our company, what we are about. And one of the keys for leaders, because many of us don't want to get into fights with people and we don't want to have to go deal with conflict, if we can get away from the concern that somebody will be angry at me personally because I'm upset because something happened that I don't like, if we forget the I in all of that statement, and instead we say, this is what we stand for, and we will not compromise it. We are known for blank, our practice is known to be the number one practice in blank and blank. We will not compromise it. You may not like me for a while. You may not be happy that we're saying this is not acceptable, but it's not about me. It's not about you. It's about taking care of our patient and living up to what we promise. And if you're ever going to get angry at me for that. Now, as a leader, you can live with that. And we as leaders, and you talked about HR, it's critical that we constantly are expressing what we're doing and why. We're constantly expressing how we are making a difference, what impact we're making. For instance, one of my very favorite clients is a healthcare system, and they invested millions upon millions upon millions of dollars for equipment. And they don't want to talk about it. It's kind of like, well, we don't want to brag about that. And I'm going, well, it's not bragging. You put all this money in for what? They go, well, we want the very latest, blah, 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 et cetera. Okay, but that's part of what we feel is important. Why are we not expressing that? It's inspiring to know. So we have to let our employees know that, instead of, hey, our stock price went up. Did you know we just put in $7.4 million for these imaging machines and such? And that means not that we make more money. No, that means our patients are able to get results in 40% quicker time so that we can help them stay healthier and overcome any kind of issues or challenges. Now, all of a sudden, that changes the message, and it has to be sincere. I'm not putting a spin on something that's negative. It has to be sincere. But we are, in 99% of the cases, we are doing those things. We just have to realize it, and we have to communicate those. And if we're going to be irritating, let's irritate people with reminding them as to why we are doing what we're doing. If they go, oh, doctor's saying this again, I am so tired of that. Okay, I'm good with that. I'm good with that because that's why we are here. And if you can't stand that, you probably shouldn't be here, because
I think it's been more than an hour that we've been shooting, and it's gone past in a second, it seems. And I can still keep asking questions, but before we call it a day, Barry, I would love for you to talk about your book and tell us a bit more about where people can find it once it gets released. What I'll do is, guys, for everyone who's listening, I'll try and attach Barry's socials in the description when this video and the episode comes out. So please check his profile out and let us know. But Barry, please tell us about the book and tell us about a couple of projects, anything that you're working on, which might be interesting for all the listeners to know about.
Well, first of all, I really thank you for today, and it did go by very quickly, so I'll be very, very sensitive to our audience and quickly just describe the book. The book is called The Power of Differentiation: Win Hearts, Minds, and Market Share. My last name is L-A-B as in boy, O-V, so it's L-A-B-O-V. So my company is LaBov.com. So our website is LaBov.com. My personal site, BarryLaBov.com. Go there. I have some free downloads for my podcast audience that you may find of interest. Feel free to download them. You do not have to include your email address. So we just do that as a gift, as a thank you. And feel free to leave me a message. We'll keep you up to date on when the book will be released. We ask on the site, if you're interested, just let us know, and we'll hold on to your email and let you.
Fabulous. Thank you so much for being so generous with your time today, Barry. And it's been an absolute pleasure. It's been a fascinating conversation, and I look forward to having you again on the podcast once the book gets released to discuss more specifics into the whole science of marketing and how it's related to mental health and psychology.